Hola, soy Judith Bayard, directora de Domus Instituto de Autismo. En nombre de nuestro instituto, les doy la más cordial bienvenida al webinar de Procesamiento Sensorial de personas con autismo. Hoy, más que nunca, las personas con autismo necesitan familias y profesionales preparados. En Domus estamos comprometidos con la difusión del conocimiento actualizado y las buenas prácticas que mejoren la calidad de vida de las personas con autismo y de sus familias. En esta ocasión, queremos abordar un tema crucial en la atención del autismo. Sabemos que la mayoría de las personas con autismo presentan alteraciones en el procesamiento sensorial y esto afecta la forma como aprenden, interactúan y se comunican. Comprender cómo funcionan los sentidos de las personas con autismo es clave para mejorar su calidad de vida. Para conocer más sobre este tema, hemos invitado a un especialista que ha hecho una gran contribución al conocimiento sobre las alteraciones sensoriales en las personas con autismo. La doctora Olga Bogdashina es experta en psicología, lingüística y autismo. Cuenta con 35 años de experiencia en estos campos e imparte cursos, entrenamientos y conferencias a nivel internacional. La doctora Bogdashina es investigadora y catedrática del Instituto Internacional de Autismo, consultora del Instituto Europeo de Educación y Psicología Infantil, fundadora de la Sociedad de Autismo de Ucrania, cofundadora del programa de autismo en el Instituto Internacional de Autismo de la Universidad Estatal Krasnoyarsk en Rusia. Es autora de 5 libros sobre autismo, entre los que destaca Problemas de percepción sensorial en el autismo y el síndrome de Asperger. Asimismo, es autora de numerosos artículos de investigación y es madre de 2 jóvenes con autismo. Este webinar tiene como objetivo que reflexionemos y comprendamos la forma en la que procesan la información sensorial las personas con autismo y que conozcamos distintas formas de apoyarlos. ¡Feliz aprendizaje!
Hello. Today we will talk about sensory perception in autism. Actually, we will reconstruct the sensory world of autism. And why is it important? And what role do sensory perception play in autism? The diagnosis of autism is based on behaviors, right? And a very well-known metaphor is iceberg, the iceberg of autism. What we see, actually, the part of iceberg, these are behaviors, but what causes these behaviors, it's under the water. So let us imagine our iceberg of autism. Again, autistic behaviors is above the water. That's what we see. What is at the bottom of this iceberg? Here it is causes. What causes autism? You can see there are many question marks because we don't know what causes autism. Actually, we do know that there are many possible causes of autism, different causes and the same behaviors. What is in between causes and behaviors? These are psychological theories of autism. In the 1990s, psychologists tried to explain autism with psychological constructs. For example, weak central coherence or lack of theory of mind. And they thought that these problems, psychological problems, cause autistic behaviors. Of course, they were wrong. These psychological problems are, again, near the surface of the water. And let's have a look. What is theory of mind? Theory of mind is the ability to perceive the mental states of others. What they say, autistic people lack theory of mind. They mean autistic people don't understand our behaviors. Autistic people don't understand our emotions. Autistic people don't understand our intentions. I agree with this, no problem. They don't. And they say it means they lack theory of mind. Stop for a minute. Do we understand the emotions? Do we understand their behaviors? Do we understand their intentions? No. What does it mean? It means we lack theory of autistic mind. I don't like it when it is one-sided. They lack this, they lack that, and we are perfect. No. And these psychologists, they designed many different tests to check whether autistic people lack theory of mind. And I won't talk about this one. It is very well known. It is Sally and Ann test. Well, I'm pretty sure you all know about it. But let us think about this. Theory of mind develops by the age of 4, but we can see the first signs of autism much, much earlier. And is the development of theory of mind independent from any other variables? No. Let's have a look at this. You can see a baby and mother, this stupid woman. Because baby, perhaps you cannot see it, but the baby actually is crying. Why? Because he cannot tolerate touch. He's very sensitive. But his mother didn't know that at the time. See, she's smiling, she's happy, posing for this picture. What would this baby learn? When mother is smiling, I am in pain, right? Of course, the baby will lack theory of mother's mind. Or take another example. For example, your child misbehaves and you decided to send him to his bedroom to think about his behavior. But sort of to punish him, right? Go and think about what you've done. But what if this autistic child who was overloaded by noises, people around him, and he suddenly finds himself in his own room where it is so quiet. So for us, it is punishment. Look at the face of this boy. He's very happy. So that's why our theories of mind are very, very different, because our experiences of the world around us are very, very different. So who is mind blind? You see, shared experiences means shared theory of mind. No shared experiences, lack of theory of mind, or theory of autistic mind. And as Peter Myers, very well known in England, artist and autistic person, says, both the autistic and non-autistic alike, in relation to each other, are mind blind. Independently they are not, together they are. Each is mind blind to the other. So please remember, it's not only them lacking theory of mind, it's us lacking theory of autistic mind. So see, these theories in a way are useful, but still they don't explain autism. So what is in between the causes at the bottom of the iceberg and these psychological theories? It is SPATS. It's an abbreviation. I will show you what it means. It is Bob Morris, a person with autism. He suggested this. It means their senses work differently. It means they have different perceptions. It means they develop different abilities. And it means they think differently. I think this diagram explains autism much, much better than theory of mind. And my approach to my research of sensory perception, of language and communication, and other areas in autism was anthropological. I listened and I read personal accounts of autistic people. I have many autistic friends, and that's how I started my research. Not like counting whatever. I started listening to their experiences. These are just few examples. For example, temple grandin. Sensory issues are very real, and they are more a matter of degree than being either present or absent in autistic people. Or Thomas McKean, an American with autism. I believe sensory anomalies may be at the root of many, if not all, behaviors that seem inappropriate and bizarre. Senses and perceptions now, we are moving to this. we all, autistic people, non-autistic people, we all have 7 senses. But you do remember that their senses work differently. Let's have a look. So 7 senses: vision, hearing, tactility, olfaction or sense of smell, gustation or sense of taste, proprioception, a very important sense in autism. Proprioception, I'll give you the definition, is how body awareness, how we feel our body. We know that many autistic people, children and adults, cannot feel where their body ends and the environment begins. They sort of feel half inside, half outside their bodies. Or proprioception includes also interoception. It is about receptors inside our bodies. Some children don't feel when they are hungry. Their body doesn't tell them. And that is why they can go without any food for hours, if not days. Others will eat and eat and eat. They don't know when to stop because their body doesn't tell them it's enough. You've got enough. Or we know many experience toileting problems because their body doesn't tell them when their bladder is full and when it is time to go to the toilet. This is very personal because I remember my problems when I didn't know much about autism, and my son, who has classic autism, he was a toddler. I couldn't toilet train him. I tried everything and it didn't work. Pictures, whatever you say, nothing worked. And when I was at the wit's end already, I decided I will try a timetable. So in the morning, first thing you do, you go to the toilet. Whether you want it or not, it doesn't matter. You sit on the toilet. Before every meal, you sit on the toilet. Before going out, toilet. Before going to bed, toilet. Now it works perfectly. And what is interesting, that in 10 years' time, I met Donna Williams, who said she used the same time schedule. She also had problems with her interoception, and she used this timetable to help her, to remind her when it is time to go to the toilet. And by the way, I didn't tell you about my son, and it is important because I will show you some examples with him. He's 32 now, and when he was very young, he was diagnosed not with autism. You can imagine it was the end of the 1980s when he was born. Not many people knew about autism. So he was diagnosed with severe mental retardation. We don't use these words now, but it was written in his medical card. And at the age of 2.5, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Of course, I couldn't accept that. I just couldn't. That's when I decided, if we have no specialists in this country, I will become a specialist myself. I lived in another European country at the time. And I had a baby daughter who turned out to have Asperger's syndrome, by the way. So I have 2 children on the spectrum, one with classic autism. And yes, he was very difficult. He didn't talk till he was 7 years old. Can you imagine? Screaming, yes. Whatever, shouting, but nothing, not a word. And I do remember at the time, I didn't know much, as I said, and I do remember I was praying, please start talking. Please start talking. I will help you I will tell you about this world. I will teach you, but please help me teach you. Now, you know what? Now I say, shut up, will you? Because he's talking non-stop. Yes, he is autistic. Yes, he cannot express his emotions verbally. He can't. He cannot, tell me much. But he likes to comment. He likes to interrupt. He likes, he likes to communicate. He wants to communicate. Now it is difficult. So think what you are praying about. And my daughter, Asperger's syndrome, she graduated from the university. She did masters. Now she works in Amsterdam and she speaks 5 languages. She is fluent in 5 languages. Both children are on the spectrum, but their needs are very, very different. I told you about this because I will show you how different their sensory profiles are. If you know one child with autism, you remember this, you know one child with autism. That is why I want to tell you Asperger's syndrome and autism, their needs are very different in my family at least. So proprioception is a very important sense in autism. Vestibular system, it is inside our inner ear. It's about the position of the head and body in space. And one or several senses can be affected in each child or adult for that matter. And what is perception? Perception is a process by which our organism gets the information, interprets it, and acts on it. So there are several stages. Look at this diagram as well. Stimulus, let us say this object. So the first stage of perception is sensation. We can touch it, but we don't know what it is yet. We can look at it, we don't know what it is yet. We can smell it, we don't know what it is yet. We know it is a rectangular shaped object with sheets made of paper covered with some black dots, right? So this is the first stage, sensation. Then the next stage of perception is interpretation. I look at it, oh yeah, it's a book. I know it is a book, it is interpretation. And then comprehension. I know what I can do with it. I can read it, right? So in the past, it was believed that autistic people have problems at the stage of interpretation and comprehension. And perhaps that is why my son and others like him 30 plus years ago were diagnosed with mental retardation. Nothing of the kind. All the problems and differences start at the stage of sensation. They see everything different. They hear everything different, okay? So let us move on. What if people sort of do not have this vision, right? Visual problems or blindness. People are blind. The same process, they go through the same process. Or they, of course, don't look at this object. They would touch it and recognize it by touch. They would recognize it as a book. And they would know, I can read it if it is in Braille, of course, right? In autism, it is very, very different. Look what Tito Mukhopadhyay writes. When I pick up a book, I may turn the pages and sniff each page before looking at the pictures in it. Someone else with autism may tear a page or two. Another person with autism may totally ignore it because his perception would be directed towards some other aspects of environment. And we do know when children sort of, turning pages, listening to the sound. So for them, this concept is very different because they see, they feel, they hear everything differently. Then, different sensory experiences. If we experience the world differently, it means we have different perceptual worlds. And the problem for many autistic individuals is that they don't realize their sensory perception is different. How can you know that your sensory perception is different from 99% of population? You're born with it, right? You can't know that other people see everything differently. So a typical thought they might have is, and this is from real life Spicer, there is something wrong with me. I can't do things right. Everyone is mad at me. No matter how hard I try, something goes wrong. Other people can do things I can't. It must be my fault that I'm having so much trouble. No, and he wants us to feel what it might be like. He said, imagine you are colorblind and you cannot distinguish between green and red. And you're a student in a classroom and your teacher hands out sheets of paper with instructions of what you were going to do today. But unfortunately, these instructions are in red, printed on the green background. everyone but you would know what to do, and they would start working. Only you would sit there looking at this sheet of paper and thinking, what is going on? What is wrong with me? Why can't I do things right? I think it is a very good example, and that is why when we will discuss all these sensory perceptual phenomena in autism, I do want you to imagine what it might be like for you if you saw the way your child, for example, sees now here, and so on and so forth. Because we live in the same physical worlds, but we live in two parallel sensory perceptual ones. And that is why we have to learn about autistic sensory world to be to move closer to them. And my question to you all is, whose reality is more real? If they see everything different, for them it is their reality and it is very real. We see it differently, it is our reality. So whose reality is more real? Whose reality is the correct one? Think about it as well. For example, to learn about different sensory perceptual worlds, we have to learn how to switch perspectives from our perspective to the perspective of our child, for example. Let's look at this. Is this lady on this picture young or old? Can you see? Young lady? These are her eyelashes, right? Her hair, her ear, her face turned from us. And now switch your perspective. And you can see an old lady, can't you? This is the nose. This is the eye. These are white hair, right? Can you see it? It's impossible to see two of them simultaneously. It's just impossible. So that is why we have to learn to switch from one perspective to the other. It's just to prepare you for our autistic experiences. So, and my favorite quote is by Jasmine Lee O'Neill. She's an Irish lady, nonverbal, and that's what she says. Learning how each individual autistic person's senses function is one crucial key to understanding that person. Many of them say the same thing, but I think this quote is really perfect, and we will start with this. But before we go any further, you see, sensory dysfunction. I don't like this word either, you know. I prefer different sensory experiences. Yes, there might be problems as well, but still, I think the more accurate description is different sensory experiences, because not all the differences in perception are dysfunctional. And there are strengths based on their sensory perceptual features. And some difficulties may be caused by the environment. And if they are accommodated, this particular dysfunction would disappear. For example, some cannot tolerate fluorescent lights, which are flickering for them. Just switch them off, and this particular dysfunction will disappear. So let us start with sensory experiences. And my favorite explanation of autism is Markram's theory and his suggestion. He calls autism, he and colleagues, the intense world syndrome. So the main idea is they feel, they perceive, and remember too much. They are not slow. Their brains are in overdrive all the time. And they feel, they see, they hear, they remember too much. So this is the idea of this, the intense world syndrome. And the same person can have positive and negative experiences because of it. Let us take, again, O'Neill experiences. What she says is, all things are heightened for me. So what a regular person would be tickled with pleasure over, I'll be totally ecstatic. Likewise, someone else's small irritation will turn into a catastrophe for me, like 100 nails screeching a blackboard. So yes, so it's not about good or bad, it's both. There are difficult things, but on the other hand, positive things as well. I feel that my autism enables me to experience my surroundings in an intense way, both physically and emotionally. I have finally developed hearing and smell, and I react to tiny changes in weather patterns and atmosphere pressure, much the way an animal would. And she sort of likes these abilities she has. So autism, it's like non-autism. There are good things and bad things, you know? So we have to remember this. We will help them with their problems, but we will use their abilities to develop their full functionality in this world. And this intense world syndrome also includes emotional hypersensitivity or vulnerability to emotional overload. First, I will give you a few quotes, and then I will explain why I'm talking about emotions while discussing sensory perception. Jasmine O'Neill, autistic people generally don't seem to feel subtle emotions. Everything happens on a large level. And from Donna Williams, gentleness, kindness, and affection terrified me. At the very least, made me uncomfortable. See, even positive emotions can be very painful. We will talk about it a bit later as well. Emotions, unprocessed, unidentified, and all muddled, may terrify us. People, as a major source of ever-changing sensory input, may become a source of threatening overload we'd like to seek to avoid. So why are we talking about emotions while talking about sensory problems? Because emotions start as sensory feelings. Do you remember meeting someone who is very, very angry? The face is red, right? The body like this, voice very loud. It is all sensory. Emotions start as sensory feelings. And as most autistic people's senses work in hyper, they are hypersensitive. And feelings start as sensations, either conscious or subconscious, unconscious. It is no wonder that many autistic people are emotionally hypersensitive. Or as Bill Stillman says, my entire nervous system is intensely sensitive, such that my emotions and senses vibrate at a frequency different than most. And here I have to explain echoemotica. This term was coined by Stephen Shaw, a professor in American university, right? And I think many people noticed it, especially parents. For example, I do know that it exists. What is echoemotica? It is feeling somebody else's emotions through your body, not understanding what is going on. Do you remember emotions are physical, right? Sensory feelings. For example, imagine this situation. Because all people can feel it, but in autism, it's sort of hypersensitive to these feelings. A husband and wife are having an argument in the kitchen, shouting at each other, plates are flying across the kitchen, you know. Yeah. And then knock at the door, and they quiet, you enter the door, and they're smiling. You're welcome, you know. You enter the kitchen, you feel it. The atmosphere itself, you feel what's happening, something is wrong, right? And now imagine our very hypersensitive children. They feel it in their bodies. The same, you know, they pick up, they are like, I don't know, they detect it and you feel it through them. How do they know it is not their emotions, it's somebody else's? They can't know this. Even adults like Stephen and like many friends I know, it took them years to learn to distinguish between their own emotional feeling and somebody else's. And that is why, about teachers who work with autistic children, you know, when you have some personal problems and you come to work at school and you think you are professional and you can sort of hide your feelings. No, you can't. You enter the classroom, you know, subconsciously you emit whatever is happening inside you, and somebody who is very hypersensitive, they will pick it up and they wouldn't understand what happened. And they would start twitching and you start shouting, sort of, it's like a snowball. So sometimes it is us who triggers these behavioral problems, right? Echoemotica is very, very important phenomenon in autism. Please remember. But now we will start the discussion of qualitative differences. And sensory problems are recognized now. 30 years ago, they were nothing. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Now they are recognized. I should be happy I am not. I've been fighting for this 30 years for the recognition of the role of sensory perception in autism. Because now they are oversimplified. Usually people think hypersensitivity, right? When a child shut the ears and whatever, or hyposensitivity. It is much more complex than that. And we will, because hypersensitivities are consequences of some other sensory perceptual phenomena. And this is one of them. It is called Gestalt perception, or another term is sensory gating deficit. It is their inability to, this is the definition, it is here, the inability to distinguish between foreground and background information. Or like Donna Williams says, it was like having a brain with no sieve. What it means is somebody with visual gestalt, they cannot filter, they cannot screen out visual stimuli at the stage of sensation, right? They don't recognize them yet. Just this visual, whatever they are, colors, you know, different patterns, pictures, objects, they jump out of them. They don't know what is important, what is relevant for the situation and what is irrelevant, because at the stage of perception, they haven't processed it yet. So that is why they are overloaded very easily. Or somebody with auditory gestalt perception. For example, like now you are listening to me and you hear my voice. But if there was somebody with auditory gestalt, they could hear other sounds around them. Somebody talking in the next room by one, car passing outside, water in the pipes, and so on and so forth. It's so difficult for them to focus on something while other sounds interfere all the time. And there is an explanation. Here you can see this research papers and theoretical explanations here, references at the bottom of the slide. I'll give you just one example from Tito again. Every corner demanded my attention. Voices competed with voices. The colors of the clothes and dresses worn by people competed with each other. Even the pictures on the walls seem to compete with each other for my attention. What do I hear and where do I look? This is a very good description of the problems. And there is another definition of Gestalt perception. Perception of the whole scene as single entity with all the details perceived, not processed at the stage of sensation simultaneously. So for us, for example, this is a book, this is a mug, this is, you know what I mean? What somebody with Gestalt perception vision, it is one picture. And if tiny detail is different, it's a different picture altogether. The best illustration is like here, Peter Meyer's picture. Pictures by autistic savants or savants, those who can draw like this. Peter Myers, just to remind you, he lives in New York, a brilliant artist and sculptor with autism. You can see here the York Minster. Every detail is here. You can see it, right? So for him, it's not so many windows, whatever. It's one picture, one. So if something is missing here, it will be a different picture altogether. You can say, okay, these are the ones. Why do I compare autistic people, like so-called low-functioning autistic people like my son, with them? Easily, because there are only two differences between people like Peter and somebody like my son. The first one is people like Peter, they are not overloaded, they are not overwhelmed with the stimulation. They take everything in and store it in their memory. Somebody like my son, it would be impossible. He is overloaded. It is too much. And the second difference is people like Peter can produce something like this, and it is spectacular, isn't it? Somebody like my son, no, he can't do that. But these are the only difference. They all experience Gestalt perception, perception of the whole scene with all the single entity should be there all the time. And that is why they resist to change and they insist on sameness. Because if any tiny detail is different, they don't know what to do. I'll give you more examples from Tito. I cannot tolerate any kind of change. If a chair or a table was out of place, I would immediately place it where it is supposed to be. It would distress me to find someone had picked up a magazine from the coffee table because I had arranged them in a certain way. So guests would be very surprised to find me taking the magazines from their hands and putting them back where I thought they should be. And by the way, yes, I know it is very difficult for them to accept these changes, but I find something positive in it. If I tell you that our house is relatively tidy, not because of me, because my son cannot tolerate a piece of fluff on the floor, he will pick it up and takes it to the rubbish bin. If there is a coin somewhere, he put it on the table. If my mug is next to the phone, no, it belongs to the kitchen, he would take it to the sink, So in a way it is good because, everything should be tidy, everything should be the way it was before. But in many situations, yes, it is difficult. And that's how Tito explains that they have mental maps. So what is a mental map? A mental map is a mental picture I form, which I expect to face in the process of events, so that I am not surprised or shocked by any sudden situation. I have a mental map of how things should happen around me. When they do not take place as expected, the anxiety is no less than any physical pain. It produces an amplified sensation throughout my gut. And this is not a metaphor. It is painful. We are talking about physical pain if something goes differently. And this example. So every situation is unique, everything, because anything different, and that is it. Moments with their own uniqueness challenged me so much that I began to fear all those unknown paths, clothes, food, shoes, chairs, and strange human voices. Each one challenged me by putting in front of me a new situation for me to face and understand. Again, I will repeat, any change destroys Gestalt and brings confusion and fear. They can react, for example, like my son. He reacted only to my voice when he was young. If anyone talked to him, nothing, he was not interested. If I repeated the same sentence, he would react to my voice. See, now, of course, he can react to anyone, but it takes longer. Anyway, it took quite a lot of time for him to learn how to do it. And this is a beautiful example. Because, see, they create their own connections and new gestalts. Every experience settled in my mind as a natural phenomenon, which laid down the rules of the world. I want you to think about Newton's law, right? Isaac Newton's law, that the apple would always fall to the ground, right? This is the law. This is the natural phenomenon. For them, it is the same natural phenomenon. For example, if I saw a bird on a tree, and at that very moment, I saw someone walking across the street in front of our gate, I concluded that every time a bird sits on a tree, someone needs to walk across the street. And you can imagine if there was a bird and nobody was walking, you can imagine what was happening, right? It as if you saw the apple from the ground flew up to the sky. This is how it is difficult for many of them. But they do learn to be more flexible, but we have to understand that yes, it is difficult. Because see, another thing is, if there is something different, all skills that they learned already become non-applicable. And that is why when we teach a child words, like some speech therapists, for example, right? Showing pictures or objects or whatever, and use the same all the time. For example, you show the child this object, not even a picture, you give this object, and you say, look, this is a plate. I can tell you the child will remember that this is a plate. He perhaps, touch it, smell it, or whatever, but he will remember this object is a plate. They are very clever. But next day, you will show this object to the same child and say, this is a plate. It can't be a plate. Don't you agree? It just can't. It is very, very different. Or if you show this object and say it's a spoon, they will remember it is a spoon. But this cannot be a spoon then. And that is why it is so important not to use the same pictures all the time or the same objects. To learn about plates, spoons, streets, dogs, whatever, they have to see many dogs, streets, spoons, plates, bowls, and whatever. Because see, another thing is, if it is the same person they are learning these words with, they will learn to answer this person's questions. But when they come to school and the teacher, they have to start from scratch. The child wouldn't react to the voice, to this person. So we have to teach them the same skills with different pictures, different objects, in different situations, in different places, and with different people. And they do learn. And they do learn how to generalize. It just takes them much, much longer. Please remember, these are consequences of Gestalt perception. And we all know about rituals and routines, sometimes are very sophisticated. I remember a boy I used to work, an autistic nonverbal, and his bedtime ritual was very complicated. Before going even to his bedroom upstairs, he had to walk around his father's armchair twice. Then he had to touch the wall behind the armchair, then something else, and only then he would proceed to the bedroom to start a ritual of undressing and going to bed. For us, it is so sort of complicated, isn't it? Walking, touching, whatever. For the boy, it was one single behavior. It is Gestalt, routine, ritual. If he was interrupted, he would start from the very beginning. Okay, so it is important to remember as well. And that's what they say. All ritualistic behavior is for reassurance and creating order in daily life. Autistic people count on their routines. They give structure to the day. Specific rituals involving getting dressed each morning or preparing for a task may be quite long and complicated, or I think because I know about some rituals. My son uses it. Often eating also becomes a ritual. Certain foods are eaten in certain ways, using the same progressive steps. Rituals are soothing and they do feel nice. They define areas of living. Okay. So, on the other hand, again, not everything is bad, no. Gestalt perception can account for strengths of autistic people's perception too. Just to show you pictures, Eric Phipps, he is an artist from London with autism. That's the picture he created. And this is Peter Myers. I know him personally. And I love this picture because it is, you can see cats and you can see blue and black cats. I think it's amazing, isn't it? And what is more, Gestalt perception is reflected at higher levels. For example, Gestalt memory. And the best illustration is this picture. You can see its creation by Lewis. At the time he was 9 years old, non-verbal autistic boy. He didn't talk at all, but he could draw beautifully well. And this is a picture of Humpty Dumpty. Perhaps you heard about it. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And can you see how clever it is? The whole story is in one picture. So I think it's the best illustration for Gestalt memory. And this Gestalt memory, Donna Williams called it serial memory. And that's how she described it. Serial memory is a kind of sensory mapping device. It can be triggered in a variety of ways. For example, touching the doorway to a room may trigger the serial memory of touching the same doorway of the same room another time and the events that happened after this. Please remember about this phenomenon because it is very important. I will show you a bit later how it works. Because what is different and difficult for them. If they remember something while remembering, they re-experience the event and it makes the past feel very present. And this past reality becomes the present reality with a full package of the past emotional and physical experiences. And can you imagine if the experience was bad? And suddenly this memory was triggered by whatever sound, sight, smell, and it was bad experience. And they are reliving this memory and you can see challenging behaviors. What triggered this? Something from the past, but we will talk about it a bit more. So sometimes a word, a combination of sounds, certain patterns, movements, or smells can trigger memories. And if they are connected with something unpleasant or painful that happened when the person encountered the same stimuli for the first time, he may react with challenging behavior. This is important to remember. You will see how it is connected to everything else. And this is a list of possible indicators how to recognize Gestalt perception. And I won't read them all, but still you can see that it is in every sensory modality. Different children, different modalities can be affected. For example, notices every tiny change in the environment. It might be visual Gestalt. They cannot sort of, filter, and that is why all these details are there. Or somebody does not recognize a familiar environment if approached from a different direction. It is visual. It is about me. I have no sense of direction. I cannot find my house. What I'm ashamed to say it, but this is my problem, and my family knows me, and they take me by hand and walking with me. If I'm 50 meters, but from different angle, I cannot recognize my house. I've been living in it for 30 years, and still, I do understand autistic people with this problem. And then auditory, but you've got this list, so I won't read it, everything. What is more important is what we can do to help. First, as I said, different children, different problems, right? For somebody, it is visual Gestalt. And that is why, or for somebody, it is auditory. For somebody, it is tactile, olfaction, and so on and so forth. So you have to find out which channel or channels do not filter information and make the environment simple. Like if it is visual problem, right? Visual Gestalt, make it visually simple. If it is auditory, auditorially simple. I will explain. About 10 years ago, our government, I think Tony Blair was there, yeah. They sort of issued a policy for schools make learning fun. And I remember schools, all walls covered with bright pictures, all this displays, whatever, and plus movement, plus chaos, right? Can you imagine? For somebody with autism and visual gestalt, it is not funny. It's not only learning is not fun, there is no learning at all. How can they learn if they are attacked by all this visual stimulation? And the same goes about auditory, especially somebody who cannot screen out information, auditory information. It's a huge problem for them. Okay, I wanted to tell you this example. When my son graduated from a school for autistic children, I couldn't find a college for him. You know, there are problems here, huge problems. Because, see, he was very low functioning, but I worked with him, whatever. He's still not high functioning, but he's not low functioning. You know, he's in between. And we had a college for very, 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 very difficult, and not difficult, non-verbal, you know what I mean, sort of support, more support. And we have college for Asperger's syndrome. So nothing for my son. So I found the college. I went to the college for disabled people, not necessarily mental, any disability, physical as well. And they said, please take my son in, please. And I help you. I will give you training. You know, I will sort of, he must be not the only one with autism in the area. You will have more autistic students and I will help you. I will. And they decided, yes, let us try. They were really good. I'm really grateful to them. But you can imagine, because at the time when he was teenagers, on puberty, development, he was very difficult, his behavior. You can imagine the first, because it was in a different city, a different town, so we took him to this college. And the first day, his teacher was like this. First autistic student in his life, and I explained, don't look at him, don't do this, don't. I gave them instructions, don't do that, do that. And me, you can imagine, because there were situations where police were involved anyway. And so they took him to college, and I was walking for 4 hours around the college waiting for him and listening. No police, no ambulance. So far so good, so far so good. And then at the end of the day, his teacher was so happy, and my son was so, they were both smiling, and I was relieved. And his teacher said, you know, your son is so clever. And I said, yes, I know, but how do you know? Because, you know, he was teaching out clever. I know he's, there were 4 students in one room, each in the corner, and support staff, sort of, they were each one-to-one. And your son, Alusha, he answered not only his questions, but he answered all the questions around, because he couldn't filter it. Okay, it was quiet, more or less quiet, so he could cope, but sometimes he cannot. You know, this is important to remember. So if it's auditory, so make environment auditory quiet and whatever. So this is the main thing to remember. Then structure and routine. You know why teach works? Because structure and routine, structure of place, structure of time. It's so important. Like here you learn or do classes, here you play, here you have lunch and whatever. Because when they are very anxious, the place itself will tell them what they are supposed to do. Or structure of time, Monday, 9 o'clock, I don't know, mathematics, but and see, again, the time will tell them. So structure and routine works really, really well. Then always communicate to the child beforehand in a way he can understand, whether it is using verbal or pictures or tactile means, what will be changed and why. I can tell you, you can reason with them. If they know what is going to be different and why, there won't be problems. Many of them don't like surprises, just don't like them, because even pleasant surprises, it's something they cannot cope, especially now, you know, Christmas time. I know one family, they were struggling with Christmas every year. You know why? the mother, she always wanted to buy for her son, autistic nonverbal son, something he liked, and she knew that he likes this so much. So she bought it, wrapped it up, put under the tree. Christmas Day, she thought, oh, at least he will be happy, because she wanted this car or whatever it was. I think it was some car, not just plain, something car, but very sophisticated. And she said, he will be happy. No, that Christmas was ruined completely. He unwrapped the present, saw it, and he, you don't want to know what happened next, but the Christmas was ruined. Why? Even pleasant surprises, if they can't, it's too much. You remember Donna Williams' quote about pleasant emotions? You see, even something pleasant, and mother, she decided that is it. Next year, before Christmas, she took her son shopping. They choose the present, they bought it, they brought it home, they wrapped it up together, they put it under the tree. Christmas was beautiful, brilliant, you see? And there are so many examples, and it is true not only for nonverbal, whatever, Asperger syndrome people, many, perhaps not all, but many don't like surprises. And again, no time for this example, but because we have to move on, so much to discuss. And what is more, helps them to see structure in every situation they are. Prepare them. We will go there, and there will be this and that. It's like helping them to know what will happen. Of course, we cannot predict everything, but anyway. Then, a very important point is, again, another reason to insist on sameness. Do we know children who cannot tolerate when their nails are being clipped? My son was like this. Or hair. Now we know the explanation. What is it? It is the inability or difficulty to stop feeling the change, leading to overload or hypersensitivity and so on and so forth. In the morning, when you put something on, right, a top on, you feel it just for a few seconds and then you forget. For them, they keep feeling it all the time. You can imagine, right? That you feel, they're feeling it all the time, for example. Or the explanation is very interesting and very useful. It's been made by the man, my good friend, whose name is very easy to remember because it is Manuel Casanova. You can see his work here, the reference, mini columns in autism. What is a mini column? A mini column, oh, I haven't got a picture of it. I thought I've got it. A mini column, it is a minimal unit in the brain capable of processing information. And they are vertical, like vertical, The signal comes in and stays there. So when Casanova compares it to shower curtains, he says, if you're having a shower and the shower curtain are fine, everything is fine. If a shower curtain is broken, water will be all over the bathroom, right? And the same in autism. The signal is not there. I mean, it enters and it goes to other mini columns. So they keep feeling it much longer. It is like water in the bathroom or fire, it's just fire in the brain, or that they cannot stop feeling it. They feeling it for days. The same about nails. You see, in the past it was believed that possibly when you cut their nails, it is painful for them. But the problem is this pain, perhaps painful, but sometimes just uncomfortable. The problem is the pain doesn't stop when the mother puts the scissors away. They keep feeling it for several days. My son, well, it was, I need several people just to help me to cut his nails because they were very long. And I know parents who wait for their child to fall asleep and then crawl into the bedroom to cut the nails. And the same goes about hair as well. The problem is in these mini columns. the signal is all over the place, and that's why they're feeling it. And as my son, when he started talking, and now he was desensitized to this. He doesn't like it when sort of we have to cut his nails. You know how he explains it? You remember his verbal language is a bit limited. He said, my nails are sticky, whatever, and they are sticky for 4 days, right? Sticky, and he can't, it's so uncomfortable. And after these 4 days, for example, 2 days he doesn't feel anything, and it is good, but it is time to, and after that, time to cut his nails again. The torture starts again. So it is possible to desensitize. And I did desensitize him to haircut. He couldn't tolerate it at all. So when he was younger, I needed 5 people. 3 people were holding him on a stool, you know, legs, arms, whatever. One person was trying to cut whatever she could, and I was dancing in front of him, trying to distract him, you know. So yes, it takes me years, but now we go to the hairdresser, and now he sits quietly and he sort of watches and looks at everything, and he likes it, and he shows, and this one, and this one, and this one, helping the hairdresser. So, but now we know the problem. So see, they can't do anything. It is about their brain. If we know what it is, we will be more sort of understanding and more patient, and we start some desensitization programs, right? The same goes about putting something on, and they feel it on their skin all the time, and it takes them longer, like 3-4 days, for example, 3 days, right? And they feel nothing, but it is time to wash it, and it starts again, the whole process. And another difficult time is when seasons change, say winter, and then spring and summer, and then winter again. When Lawson writes about it, Temple Grandin, it takes them weeks to get used to the jumpers and trousers to cover their skin in winter. Then summer comes, again, it takes them weeks to get used to exposing their skin to the sun. See, so now we know, when we know why, I think it is easier for us to find approaches, the right approaches, and to understand and emphasize with our child. So Gestalt perception makes autistic individuals very, very vulnerable to sensory information overload. You remember at the stage of sensation, all the stimuli just are pouring like rain into their brain. And that is why the most difficult places are shops, supermarkets, cinemas, you know, some with many, many people. So how can we recognize overload? Easy. Challenging behaviors might be caused by an overload in the majority of cases. But some children and adults, their reaction will be to withdraw in themselves. Physically, they are with us, but they are not. They are sort of shut down completely. They are inside themselves. Somebody start tire very easily, especially in noisy, bright places, or when standing. Many cannot stand in a queue. It is physically difficult for them. Some vomiting, and so on and so forth. What is more important, what we can do to help in these situations. First, it is very important to recognize the first signs of sensory overload, because it is better to prevent this than to deal with the consequences. And they are very physical. And for different children, different signs. I think parents know their children. Like for my son, for example, the first sign was his lips. His lips became one line, you know, just very thin, one line. Then next 10 or 15 seconds, and twitchy movements. He was not inside already. He was not in control of his body, all these movements. He was all over the place. And then challenging behaviors. So as soon as you notice early signs, whatever they are for your child, stop whatever you were doing, stop the activity, and give time and space to recover. But because if they are not in control already, so it is vital to take them out of the situation and give them time and place to recover, to recharge their batteries. What is important while taking them out, just don't, of course, don't shout. It's understandable. Don't be in the face, like, come on, come on, come on. No, be as quiet as you can. Don't be like face to face, try to get the child out. And that is it. Leave the child somewhere, but of course watching, some safe, soft room, or I don't know, sensory room, whatever, something safe. And don't be with him. After that, when he comes down, you can discuss everything. And you can sort of start thinking about strategy to help. Like the problem is, there are some situations when it is impossible, when just to remove the person. For example, I desensitized my son to big supermarkets, to shopping, because he couldn't tolerate all these lights, sometimes music, people moving, like this. And I developed this operation shopping. And it took me 2 years because it's important to desensitize him. It was very important. I will tell you as an example. I chose one of the biggest stores in the area and the busiest time. You think it is cruel? Please don't think again, because it is not. It is easy to start with all these quiet shops and then move to busiest one. No. And we chose the time in England, at least it is Sunday, and about 11 a.m. It's when all families come, for shopping for a week. Yes, it was. But our first visit, and we did it every Sunday, first visit was the most successful. It was brilliant. You know why? Because it lasted 20 seconds. He was pushing the trolley, he went in and he went out. Very proud. He did it. Now he can sort of be in the shop with me or with his sister or whatever for, I don't know. When he is with his sister and she's trying everything on, they spend their hours in the shop and he's fine. But it took us years to desensitize him. Sometimes it is difficult. And it happened when he was not fully ready. I made a mistake. By the way, I made quite a few mistakes, and I want you to learn from my mistakes. And I want you not to be afraid of making mistakes. We are human. We will make mistakes, no ideal people. I took him shopping when he could cope already for pre-Christmas shopping. Oh, how wrong I was. Because we went to the same supermarket, but there were not hundreds of people as usual. There were thousands. It was huge. It was people moving with trolleys, with children, with babies, Christmas music, and there was this announcement, buy one, get one free. It was impossible. And I could see the first signs. I could see them, lips and whatever. And I tried to sort of, protect him a bit because I couldn't remove him. We were standing in a queue to the tills, and there were shelves and there were people, and it was impossible to. And you know what triggered his behavior? Because I was trying to talk through, it's okay, I do understand how hard it is for you. You are doing really well and whatever. A lady tried to reach from behind to reach something from the shelf. That he lashed out at her. And my strategy, what to do in these situations, don't repeat it. It's my strategy. Perhaps you will find a better one, is to redirect his aggression, though it is not aggression because he doesn't want to hurt anyone. He is not in control. So to redirect him towards myself. 2 reasons. He looks absolutely normal, very tall, very handsome, and people do not expect it. And the second reason is I know what he will do, how he will kick, how, I know. So that is why I redirected everything, his movements and his actions to myself. We left the trolley and I took him out and he was kicking trolleys, pushing people. And when we were outside and he calmed down, he was crying. And he was, I was like this. He's a very tall boy, young man. And he was about 14 at the time and still he was very tall. And he was crying and he said, I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want it. And I knew he didn't, And I'm very old. I was crying as well. And I know, I love you. I know, I love you. You know who didn't help? People. They were looking at us like, we were from a sort of psychiatric hospital. That sort of teenager was kicking her and she was saying, I love you, I love you. Yes, I love him. They don't get it. They don't understand that it is difficult. But I want you to see that there are situations which are difficult. So yeah, they will happen anyway, but sort of try to think how to prevent them, be prepared for any situation, anytime. Now I have no problems with shopping. When he is an adult, no problems whatsoever. So what is more, it's not it's not enough just to notice the first signs and then remove from the situation. You cannot be with your child all the time, right? So that is why it is important to teach him how to recognize the internal signs and ask for help or use different strategies. Because see, when it is overload, they are physical. And you see, like you can see that he experiences it in his body. So for example, if you feel butterflies in your tummy, get out, sit down, shut your eyes, shut your ears, and just relax. There are several strategies, relaxation and whatever. Teach the individual to cope with these situations himself or herself. And if it is school situation, first aid kit should be always at hand. Sunglasses or, dark glasses, earplugs, squeezy toys, favorite objects, and I need help card. And this card is very important. And we have to teach them how to use this card. Because when they are overloaded, even very high functioning people, even Asperger syndrome people, sometimes lose the ability to talk and to explain when they're overloaded. So at least they have this card and they know what to do, to go to member of staff and give it to him or her, and they will help them to find a place to calm down, okay? So there are many different relaxation techniques, and so on. Another thing is, if you want to teach them something at school, please create the environment where they can learn. For example, as Temple Grandin says, it is impossible for children to learn if they are bombarded with confusing, irritating stimuli they are unable to screen out. So adjust the environment to the needs of the individual child in order to protect him or her from this painful stimulation and reduce the confusion caused by possible distortions, fragmentations, and so on. Like I started already with visual gestalt, for example, and all these displays on the walls. It is hard for this child. We put the table and the child to face the wall, plain wall, only with his timetable, and that is it. And even for some children, we put physical screens, for him not to be distracted by other visual stimuli around him. So it worked. So create the environment where they can sort of learn, because if all these distractions, it's impossible for them to learn. And of course, it is important to have a safe place at home and school for them to function successfully, where they can go and relax and calm down. And another thing is, let them have a safety object. We know that some children will insist on carrying something in the hand. It can be a twig, a spoon, a toy, whatever. It can be anything, right? And they go out and they carry it, and it is okay. Look at these pictures, right? You can see a boy, very relaxed, happy, and you can see in his right hand, he is holding this pink card or whatever it was. I don't even remember what it was. It's not even, it's without pictures, whatever, but he brought it from home and he is quite relaxed. For whatever reason, he felt safe when he was holding it. So when we went out, he would carry something like this and he felt better, right? So it is important to let them carry this piece, whatever piece they're carrying, toy and whatever. And again, another example, you can see the same boy, 5 years in between, and 2 different countries. We traveled a lot. And you see the same object in his hand. Can you see it? And if you can't recognize what it is, I can tell you what it is. It is reindeer, Rudolph. And it was a free toy they gave us in the shop. You know, we bought something and they gave it free before Christmas. For him, it's never been a reindeer. He didn't know it was a reindeer. He gave a different name to this toy. For whatever reason, he called it Gnome. So this was the name, Gnome. And he never played with this. But he took this Gnome wherever we went, to a different country, for example, right? And you can see, and he could sleep with this Gnome. I could take him on holiday to Europe, and you see what he did? He put it under his chin and he fell asleep. For whatever reason, this Gnome helped him to, it was his best friend or whatever, but he never talked to it. He never played with this. It wasn't a toy. It was absolutely necessary object. You can, some people asked me, you know, what happened to this Gnome and how he could cope after that. Yes, Gnome went through washing machine hundreds of times. Of course, a lot of patches, no, poor thing. And it retired now. It's still in his bedroom on the shelf. But now we are with elephants. He loves elephants. And he's got a collection. And he decides which elephant goes to respite, which elephant goes on holiday with him. As I said, he never plays with this. So it is here he is about 17 years old, you can see. And some people say, but it is not age appropriate. I agree, it isn't. Here he is about 17, 18 years old. Of course it isn't age appropriate, but do I care? No. You see, it is their problem who think it is not age appropriate, because he doesn't play with it outside like a child. So it is not embarrassing. Whose business is it what he has got in his bedroom, right? Why not? If he likes to sleep with, why not? If it helps him. So I think people, I always say, before you start sort of, you know, judging others, find a mirror and look at yourself and think, are all my actions age appropriate? Are all my actions sort of logical and rational? And are all my hobbies? Because see, for the life of me, I cannot understand what is so enjoyable to watch grown-up men running around one ball. Give them a ball each and let them play. I find it, and people shouting some order. I think, you know, I am, okay, I don't understand it, but I would never switch off TV when my husband is watching this stupid game. Of course I won't. Okay, you know, he's like a child, I always say. So, and the same goes for them. Let us respect their, if it creates some sort of safety for you, it's okay. And as I said, he will never, it's not embarrassing because nobody else can see it. It lives in his bedroom. Why not? So The sensory overload and caused by Gestalt perception can lead to several different routes, and it may result in system shutdown. What is it? Very early in life, without our help, because we don't know they need this help yet. They are very, very tiny. Our children learn how to protect themselves. They learn to shut down their sensory channels, painful sensory channels. For example, for Temple Grandin, it was tactility and auditory. That's what she says. When sensory stimulation became too intense, I was able to shut off my hearing and retreat into my own world. In pulling away, I may not have received stimulation that was required for normal development. Because if it is created early in life, it is self-imposed sensory deprivation. So we have to be very careful with this. We have to, because some of them don't want to get out. So it is really important to remember. And with my son, he was about 3 or 4, nonverbal. And a nurse was visiting us. And I remember he was standing in the middle of the room. I was standing behind him. And I shouted his name to attract attention. Not even a blink, nothing. And the nurse making notes in his medical card. He might be deaf. You have to take him. Oh, no. I knew he wasn't. And I didn't bother to take him to a specialist because I knew when I started unwrapping his favorite biscuit in the kitchen, he would be next to me in seconds. He could hear even better than anyone else. But he learned to protect himself, switching off his hearing when it was really painful. So another possible scenario because of overload. If they continue to try to process all the information coming in, despite their inability to keep up with it, it may result in hypersensitivity and distortions that eventually bring anxiety, confusion, frustration, stress, and difficult behaviors, right? And I will tell you a paradoxical thing. And if I tell you that those whom we consider challenging, difficult, if I tell you that they have a better potential, I will explain. It's not my idea, Donna Williams, but I noticed it in many, many people. Look, those whom are withdrawn, aloof children who are in their own world, right? They are much more difficult to reach. It's more difficult to reach them. Why? They've given up. They're in their own world and they're happy. They don't want us. And that's why it is by the way, some teachers love these children. What not to love? Mother brings every morning your child to the classroom. The child sits in the corner rocking perhaps, and then she takes the child home. What not to love? But in fact, those whom we call difficult, challenging, really have a better potential. Why? Because they do want to be with us. They are motivated to participate in our activities. And that is why they continue to try to process everything. But you remember, their brains work very differently. And that is why they are not coping. But in fact, they want to be part of us. And that is why we have to protect them from difficult environments. But on the other hand, we have to desensitize them to as many possible situations, as possible. And I'll give you just one example, again, because I had many desensitization programs like shopping, cinema, and whatever. And when it was many years ago, 15 or more, it was Operation Cinema, when he enjoyed the longest film ever. And I mean Harry Potter 1. Do you remember Harry Potter 1? It's the longest film ever, 3 hours or something. I was sitting there looking at my watch and whatever, and he enjoyed it so much. And I thought, okay. And I made another mistake. And I took him to watch again long ago, the last James Bond with Pierce Brosnan. I don't remember the title. If you remember, don't tell me. I don't want to know. Because 40 minutes into the film, and I saw first signs, and I knew we were as a family. There, his sister, me, his dad, and him. And, you know, 40 minutes, and he started kicking the seat in front of himself, shouting, "Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it," and, you know, all this. Of course, I tried to get him out. Oh, no way. He started shouting, "We are a family. I want to be with you. We are a family. We are a family." You see, he was not coping, but he refused to go out because he thought, you know, we are together. And what aggravated the situation was that the public, for very stupid reasons, because there were two battles to win. One, Pierce Brosnan and this bad guy on the screen, and the other, me and my son. And for very stupid reasons, the public were very much interested in the outcome of the second battle. And all this attention, it didn't help. I tried to bribe him. I promised everything under the sun, starting with ice cream and ending up with a trip to Mars. Nothing worked, so I took him out eventually. And again, we were crying together outside. But that's to show, you know, he was and he is very motivated to participate in life. He doesn't want to sit in his bedroom all the time, you know, doing nothing. No, he wants to be sort of part of the life around him. So that is why, please remember. And after one of these difficult situations, I asked him to draw himself. Look, it's him. He was 14 at the time. Can you see the hands? It is hands, hands, and hands. His whole body hands. And he couldn't cope with hands because people were pointing, and he couldn't cope with pointing at all because his vision was fragmented. I will show you a bit later. And after that, I asked him, forget about hands, and we have this code word, panic attack. I said, show me where you felt your panic, and look what he showed. And you can see in the head. So that's how we discuss what to do in these situations, how to get out, and what strategies to use. So it helps a lot. So, and that is, Gestalt perception may result in different experiences. You can see fragmented perception, distorted perception, delayed processing, hypersensitivity. Can you see where it is placed? So it is the consequences of many other sensory phenomena. It's not the main thing. It is caused by Gestalt, fragmentation, and so on and so forth. Very briefly, fragmentation. Let us go back to sensation. At the stage of sensation, right? It is Gestalt. All the stimuli come in, but we don't know what it is yet. But when they start processing, they process bit by bit by bit, and we get fragmentation because no brain is capable of processing all the stimuli simultaneously. It is impossible. And my favorite quote from Donna Williams, I had always known that the world was fragmented. My mother was a smell, my father was a tone, and my older brother was something which was moving about. Like mother visually, Donna could see mother visually, like, you know, stage of sensation. But to recognize her, she has to process, and she couldn't. It was fragmented. That is why she used smell to recognize her mother. And the same goes for father and brother. And you can see my favorite pictures from a very good friend of mine. He was 14 at the time, Asperger syndrome. And a plane, aeroplane, and below train. And fragmentation may be felt in any sensory modality, depending if it is visual Gestalt, it goes visual fragmentation, right? If it is auditory, you see the pattern. And these are just a few examples. It is Daniel Tammet, a person with Asperger syndrome. I very often hear fragments of each sentence, which my brain automatically pulls together to try to make sense of. By missing keywords, however, I quite often do not get the real content of what is being said. I want to emphasize it is Asperger's syndrome person. He lives independently, he's got a partner, he's got a job. Try to imagine what it might be like for somebody who is nonverbal and we think he doesn't understand much or whatever. You see, it's not that he doesn't understand. It is this problem. It may be this problem. For example, what I've seen in many residential units which I visited as a professional, as a psychologist, for adults, especially for nonverbal adults with autism. What I noticed, the staff, very polite, very respectful, but very, not very useful, because, or perhaps they wanted to show me how much they respect the service users, I don't know. Because imagine John, 43 years old, I remember this man, nonverbal, and the staff approaching John and says, John, will you be so kind as to come with me to the, you know what I mean? Gosh, she lost him at the word John. Because for John, what he heard was John, blah, 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 kitchen. He couldn't just process. That's why this minimal speech approach, you know, John, we go kitchen, to the kitchen. You see, and all this, could you please, will you be so, it is empty words. And they create pollution. And of course, they make it difficult for the person to process. And this again, Jasmine O'Neill, it's about tactile fragmentation and proprioception. You may observe the autistic person rubbing sandpaper on his bare arm or banging his fingers sharply into a solid wooden dresser, then peering at them as if to say, oh, hello, hand, so you do belong to me then. Sometimes their body feels fragmented, so it appears to be suspended or floating in pieces. And from Donna Williams, proprioceptive fragmentation. My perception of a whole body was in bits. I was an arm or a leg or a nose. Sometimes one part would be very much there, but the bit it was jointed to felt as wooden as a table leg and just as dead. Just imagine, if you feel, the only part of your body you feel right now, it is your nose. Isn't it not very comfortable, let us put it this way, or your arm, and the rest is wooden. So I want you to imagine what it might be like, or like Hawthorne, for example. Sometimes I felt unattached to, my body felt unattached to my head. And it just, can you imagine body and head, different, two different things. So it is important to know this. And Donna Williams, I remember we met many years ago, and she told me when she was younger, a teenager, she visited cemeteries. You know why? Because there were statues of people. And she said, only there I could learn about human body. Her vision was fragmented and her proprioception was fragmented. It means she saw people in bits and pieces, and she didn't feel her own body like a whole. So she went to cemeteries and she said, I used to run my hand from the head of the statue to learn that the head was connected to the neck, then the neck to the shoulder. That's how she learned about the body. Can you imagine how hard it might be for many of them? And of course, distorted perceptions. And it is fragmented perception is also distorted, but I decided to distinguish between bits and pieces and distortions. And there are all sorts of distortions. For example, in the field of vision, poor or distorted depth and space perception, seeing two-dimensional world, double vision, distortions of shape, size, and movement. For some autistic children and adults, rooms can seem bigger than they are or smaller than they are. And there are some cannot perceive movement clearly. And this is just a few examples. Thomas McKean, I watched with fascination as my clear vision faded to distortion. I watched as people became objects and shades of clouds. I watched as the reds, blues, and greens became different shades of gray. And Lucy Blackman, oh, an amazing lady from Australia, nonverbal. I sometimes was seeing my hands and the things I was touching as if they were multiplied or overlaid by similar reproductions of itself. And again, this example, I love it. Lucy Blackman. The question is, of course, I know nobody will answer me, but still think about it. Do you use smiley faces when in the children's notebooks, books, to show that you are pleased with the child or not? I don't know. But in Lucy's school and in my son's school, they usually put smiley faces. And what Lucy said, the faces my teachers trained me to draw had nothing to do with what I conceptualized as a face. I had no idea why the face I was expected to draw had a circle and two smaller circles in the top half with a curve below. Though I learned to label these strange shapes as faces, I knew that faces were not like that. I want to, again, to show you that they do learn and they are very clever. So they have to remember that this strange drawing is a face, though they cannot see this a face. And that's what she explains. Faces consisted of shadows, a pair of small circular shadows inside the eye, the pair of long mouth to inner eye shadows which ran along the nose. The mouth was a slit-shaped shadow. The rest of the face, eyeballs, forehead, cheeks, eyebrows, lips, chin, was not shadowed enough to catch my visual processing system. The faces of my private universe were uncontoured, without the slants and slopes and little curves which accompany eye, ear, and mouth movement. Okay? Just I want you to know that their perception is so different, and try to imagine how your child see you. This is my favorite picture. It is from my book, and it is a portrait of this artist's mother, with Asperger syndrome artist, right? I love it. I love it because you see, it's fragmented vision. We often describe them as Martians, extraterrestrials. Don't we look Martians to them? And this is another mother, also from teenager. It is very recognizable, isn't it? Because it is me. So it's useful to look at ourselves through their eyes. That is why I love their pictures. Then auditory distortions and fluctuations. As I said, it's in any sensory modality. And again, let us take from Lucy Blackman. My brain had processed the sound so differently that the human voice was continually distorted. I had heard in surges and troughs, which were further distorted by the intrusion of background noise. You can see these are indicators, no time, indicators to distortions, how to recognize distorted perception. But we will move on to delayed perception. And the main question to answer is, do we live in the same time zone? For example, let us go back to sensation. When we see, feel, but don't know what it is yet, then they start processing bit by bit. Of course, they need more time, right, to understand what is going on. And that is why their processing is delayed. I love this Donna Williams quote. As a child, it appeared as though I didn't feel pain or discomfort, didn't want help, didn't listen, or didn't watch. By the time some of these sensations, responses, or comprehensions were decoded and processed for meaning and personal significance, and I'd accessed the means of responding, I was 15 minutes, 1 day, a week, a month, even a year away from the context in which the experience happened. It is not an exaggeration. Yes, for the majority of them, it is a few seconds delay. Like, you know, when you watch TV news and the reporter is somewhere, I don't know, Iraq or whatever, and they ask the question and reporters silence and then starting like when the sound waves reaches the reporter. So for the majority of them, yes, it is like a few seconds delay. But for some, yes, it is minutes. Yes, it is hours. Yes, it is weeks, months, and years. And because sometimes you ask a child to do something, right? For example, Peter, put the chair in the corner, please. And no reaction, no reaction from them. Never does anything I ask him to do. And then you look at the chair is in the corner. It takes time sometimes to process everything, right? And that is why, this again, another example. Some people think I'm not paying attention when I'm asked a question. Because of the long pause I often need to process the question and my response, as the blank look I often have when concentrating on such processing. When people try to get my attention, they actually just distract me horribly with their impatience. And what we do, teachers do. A teacher asks a question, right? Something, whatever. And the child starts processing the question. Yes, blank look and whatever, but the child starts processing. The teacher wants to help. We always want to help, don't we? And she repeats the question louder. But for this child is a different question. What happened? We throw the child back and he starts processing this different question. And we want to help more. And we start showing something, right? Explaining, trying to help. Sort of, sometimes I think our autistic children learn, not because we teach them, despite us teaching them. Because we create more difficult. That is why it is so important to know about it. So, and it's not only about auditory. A toddler, autistic toddler, tripped over, and the mother, and nothing. And the mother relaxes, and then child started crying. It takes time to process pain, process touch. In different children, it is different sensory modalities are affected. So it is important to remember, please be patient. And high functioning Asperger syndrome people, they are very great while giving presentations, they're good. But some of them, when in these social situations, it's just impossible for them. Because as one of them says, they ask me, how are you? In England, they all ask, how are you? And she said, and I'm starting preparing my medical history, my plans for the summer. And they are talking about football, about pets, about something else. They don't wait, for the response. So it is so difficult for them in this social chit chat. So delayed perception, it may be in any sensory modality. Sometimes it is visual delay, some no blinking or whatever. So what to look for? There is a list. I'm not reading it. My voice is gone. And what to do? Please give them time to take in your question and to work out their response. Please remember, autistic individuals, they require more time than others to shift their attention between stimuli of different modalities and so on and so forth. Please be patient. Please give them time. And here we come to intensity with which the senses work. This is the right place for hyper and hyposensitivities, right? So they are consequences of gestalt perception, overload, fragmented perception, and so on and so forth. I will give you just a few examples of hypersensitivity. I won't talk too much because it is well known. Thomas McCain, there are certain things I touch that hurt my hands. For example, when I walk and the air brushing past my hands is a source of pain. Again, can we imagine that air touching hands can cause pain? Or Donna Williams, I have an acute sense of color. I see rainbows in a piece of ice. Some colors and lights have sent me into manic and euphoric episodes and giggle fits. And this example is very important from Temple Grandin. My hearing is like having a sound amplifier set on a maximum loudness. My ears are like a microphone that picks up and amplifies sound. This is very important because sensitivity, hypersensitivity, is not necessarily to loud sounds or bright lights or whatever. It is to the sounds sometimes we cannot hear. The sounds of microwave working in the next room but one. And they can hear this sound and they cannot get rid of it. They cannot shut it down. They cannot screen it out. And of course, it can trigger challenging behaviors. And hyposensitivity, the opposite, right? When the world is too dim, too quiet, sort of, not enough stimulation comes in through their senses. For example, some children can look into the bright light or sun without blinking, or some can seek noise because their hearing is in hypo, not enough noise, and some create noise themselves, like tapping things, banging doors and whatever. Again, just a few examples. My senses would sometimes become dull to the point that I could not clearly see or hear, and the world around me would seemingly cease to exist. And this example also very close to the previous one. Sometimes the world goes quiet, so quiet that the silence seems to be very loud. It is a very frightening experience. This is Alex. It is from my son. Or, I was never cold even in winter. A t-shirt was warm enough for most winter days. They don't feel cold or hot. It is for tactility. And the last one is also very interesting and perhaps very frightening example from Tito. I had no concept of my body and I never experienced it. My body was a mere reflection in front of the mirror. I never felt any pain. Now, as I said, try to imagine what it might be like if you do not feel your body at all. How do you know that you are alive? How do you know that you exist? And this was the problem for Tito. By the way, I loved his books. And there he said that his shadow was his best friend because his shadow showed him what he was doing. He didn't feel it. He flapped his hand and he saw shadow flapping the hand. So you see, it's fascinating. But at the same time, can you imagine what it might be like to live with these experiences? So hyper and hyposensitivities and what to look for. Here, if I started providing the list, it would take 10, 15 slides. So I decided I won't put it here because 7 senses, each of them hyper and each of them hypo, so many indicators. But if you think that, okay, I know this child is hypervisual, hypotactility and whatever, and you think, oh, I know, think again, because you don't know. Because the same child may, because the perception fluctuates, it is inconsistent. And the same child may be hyper one day and hypo, it fluctuates. For example, fluctuation, Lucy Blackman, skin sensation was so unbearable 1 minute and yet completely unfelt next. Or Thomas McKean, it is well documented that there are certain textures and patterns that are painful or displeasing to the touch of the person with autism. This is true from my own experience, but I'm not able to tell you what they are because they are always changing, day to day, hour to hour, sometimes even minute to minute. This can be very frustrating. Just think how difficult it is for us, for example, and for them, of course, yeah, because whatever, did I tell you that whatever autism is, it is never boring. You have to be detective all the time. But he couldn't tolerate this, but now he doesn't. It's amazing. Fluctuation, what to look for. It's easy. Response differently to the same stimulus, either with pleasure or indifference or distress. and it is visual or auditory, olfactory, and so on stimuli, may have different muscle tone, low and high. And some children, when they write or draw, so pencil lines, letters, words are uneven, sometimes too tight, sometimes too faint. It's about my son, by the way. Yeah, it's proprioception. He has problem proprioception. So, but what we can do to help with hypersensitivity and hypofluctuation. So hypersensitivity, it's very important to identify which stimuli the person finds disturbing and either eliminate them altogether. For example, use natural lighting instead of fluorescent lights. By the way, in your country, fluorescent lights, are they common or not? These tubes? Because in England they are, and it's very, very bad for autistic people. 10 minutes maximum, 15 perhaps, and that is it. Some children fall asleep, very few. Others, they can't process, they can't think under fluorescent lights. So it is a huge problem. So use natural lighting instead of this, or if impossible, provide the person with sensory aids, like tinted glasses. You can see, I can't tolerate flickering of the computer, I can't. I work a lot at the computer, so I need my glasses. And so this is the first one. Then desensitize the person to tolerate the stimuli via sensory diet. For example, if it is tactile hypersensitivity, there are special massage and brushing protocol. Occupational therapists, they know this. They prescribe special diets. It has nothing to do with food, right? And for proprioception, special physical exercises, again, they will assess the problems and they will prescribe special exercises and so on and so forth. Then monitor a number of simultaneous stimuli, reduce irrelevant stimuli. Don't try to entertain children because for many of them, it creates a lot of problems. And if possible, warn the person about fire alarms, bells, and so on, because any sudden, unexpected stimulus hurts even more than, disturbing one. If it is sudden and like, police car or ambulance and whatever, it hurts. So if possible, just warn. Or, we are waiting for telephone call. Somebody will call me on the phone. Just you prepare the child, because some children will break phones because they cannot tolerate it. And if it is impossible, then the ambulance, for example, right, with all these lights and sounds, show the source of this sound. Say, look, somebody is ill. They're taking him to hospital. Look, it is passing. It is, you see, explain that it is safe. It is okay. And with my son, it was a huge problem, but he was younger. He was 4 or 5 years old. He couldn't tolerate babies crying. Perhaps it's about the pitch of the voice, babies, when they start crying. He just couldn't tolerate it. It was painful for him. And it made our life very difficult. Of course, if I heard babies crying in the park, I wouldn't take him there. But the problem was, he would attack any baby, even if the baby was asleep. Why? Babies are unpredictable, right? And they can start crying any time. And if he is not prepared, he would jump out of his skin. So for him, it was more logical and rational to sort of hit the baby and be prepared for babies crying, okay? So it was logical for him, but can you imagine? It wasn't logical for baby's mother, for me, and whatever. So it was a desensitization program again, to desensitize him to babies crying. So I've done a lot in all those years. And that is why, especially in the shops, I've been to Mexico 2 or 3 times, but I don't remember the shops, because in England, you can't go to the shop if there is not at least one baby there already. Babies are everywhere, you know. So it was difficult. That's why there was this program. I desensitized him. And even now, not now, but about 10 years, he was 20 or something. He was an adult already. It was our ritual, because when we were in the supermarket and far away in the last aisle, you know, very far away, the baby started crying, and it was our ritual. He turned to me, looked at me and said, "Baby is crying." And I always say, "Yes, baby is crying," because it, you see, don't do it. Okay, it's not, I don't recommend it because it's not politically correct, but it works for us. And I always said, yes, baby is crying because it is small and stupid. You are big and clever. And he, yeah, and you know, and it helped him. He is big and clever. But I love babies. And that's why I always at the end sentence, the last sentence, when you were a baby, you also were crying all the time. But look at you now, you see? So I find something to help him to cope. And when he sees that I understand his problems, it works. And he's so proud of himself. Mama can say it. You see, so it is about hypersensitivities. If the child is hyposensitive, too dim, too quiet, provide extra stimulation through the channels that work in hyper. If it's not enough visual information, give the child bright toys, you know, sort of sparkling, whatever, something visual, strong visual. If it is smell, strong smells, strong tastes, it depends on the channel, which is in hypo. If it is tactility, so again, occupational therapist is your person, and so on and so forth. Then, while we are here, what I want to tell you. Now, when children are diagnosed with autism, right? And there are special classes for autistic children, for example, special schools even, or groups. It's important, not just diagnosis, but sensory profile. Why? If you place two children, because they are autistic, they are diagnosed with autism, and one of them is hypervisual, and the other one is hypovisual, and you put them in the same classroom, I can promise the teacher will look for another place of employment very soon. It is impossible to accommodate. I'm sorry, it's just impossible, because one will switch on the light, the other switch off, and they will be fighting all day. So that is why it is so important, the sensory perceptual profiles, and group them according to their sensitivities, not just diagnosis. So hypersensitivity can lead to two different experiences. Again, plus and minus, good and bad, right? Like with everything. The first one is disturbance by certain sensory stimuli, and fascination by certain sensory stimuli. Fascination. They are fascinated with certain music, sounds, sights, smells, textures. You know why? Because they are much better than us. They've got this ability to see what we cannot see, you know, to hear some tones we cannot hear. And they can appreciate the beauty of tones or something. And you know why we don't appreciate this ability? Because we don't have it. We don't, and what is more, we don't know it exists. And for example, if you cannot see the color red, how would you appreciate the beauty of a red rose? You can't. So this is the same here. Just this from Daniel Tammet. I told you about him. He has Asperger's syndrome. When he was a child, it is from his book. While walking home, I noticed a tiny ladybird crawling inside one of the hedges. I was fascinated by it, so sat down on the pavement and watched it closely as it climbed over and under the sides of each small leaf and branch, stopping and started again at various points along its journey. I counted dots over and over. At the time, I didn't think of anything but the ladybird in front of me. Those people who were walking on the pavement, what would they think about the boy? Because they just don't get it. You know, they can't appreciate it. What is more, the ability to hypersense. Sometimes they can hear, see, and what we cannot, right? So that is why sometimes autistic experiences are described as ESP or extrasensory perception. I have to tell you right now, there is nothing extrasensory, nothing. It is something that their senses are so tuned into this world. That is why they can see what we cannot see, hear, smell, or feel. And the worst thing is we cannot even imagine that these abilities are possible. For example, can you imagine what it is like to feel and see, physically see energy? For example, what detecting undetectable from Tito. The intensity of the energy in the room was very strong. I felt like a small raft floating in the midst of it. The energy bounced across the room, all around the walls. The pictures reflected them, and the tables diverted them towards the ceiling. I could actually see the pathway of the energy wave bouncing around with speed. Fascinating, isn't it? And so sensory intolerance, it is the stimuli that they cannot tolerate it. And for example, if it is visual, they close eyes in bright lights or squint eyes, get easily frustrated or tired under fluorescent lights, or tries to destroy, break objects producing sounds, for example, as I said, phone, or babies, taking babies, making them cry, gets frustrated with certain colors, sounds, smells, taste, movement. So in every sensory modality. And now, sensory intolerance. Please look at this picture. Do you find it uncomfortable? Can you imagine if your room, if it's wallpapers in your room, can you imagine you would go mad in 15 minutes, right? And I wanted to make you uncomfortable because for some it is intolerable, but other stimuli, but very intolerable. Please remember what we think enjoyable, for example, fireworks, may be fearful or overwhelming to autistic children. Because fireworks, it's not about the sound, the rocket, it's about bright lights, right? It's impossible for some to tolerate. And that is why be aware of the colors and patterns, because some cannot tolerate certain patterns, lines. It will be like this picture I provided. If you cannot look at it, don't look at it. Always warn the person about the possibility of stimulus he is fearful of, and show the source of it. We talked about it. And now, strategies to cope with light sensitivity, because many of them have this problem with light sensitivity. As I said already, turning off any unnecessary lighting, using lamps rather than overhead lights, and tinted lenses, tinted glasses. I was so privileged and fortunate. I met Donna Williams and we talked. It was in her bungalow. We were sitting on the carpet on the floor, Donna and me. And it was 29th February 1996, so many years ago. And it was her. Can you see she is wearing tinted glasses? Here in the picture, but they are a bit purple, your glasses. And that's what she said. We were talking for 4 hours sitting on the floor. And my son, he was young, very young boy. He was running around us because there were no furniture, flipping something in front. He was bored for 4 hours. And that's what Donna said. You know, I think he sees the world the way I did before I started wearing tinted glasses. Without these glasses, everything around me was fragmented. I might look at somebody and see his nose, then his eye, then his ear. All these bits and pieces of visual information should have been pasted together in my head to get the whole picture. The colored lenses paste the objects, people, surroundings together, freeing me from this job and giving me more opportunities to use other senses efficiently. Why don't you take your son to one of the Orleans centers? I think tinted glasses will be very beneficial for him. I'm so grateful because I said, no, no, Donna, it is his hearing. It is his hearing. She said, trust me. And I did trust her. And I will explain. As soon as he started wearing tinted glasses, his hearing improved. We will talk about it a bit later. Look, at the left, my son couldn't tolerate, it was fireworks. You can see how he couldn't tolerate these fireworks, right? And look at the right picture, wearing his tinted glasses. The color is brown. It's not red. It's here. You know, the colors are a bit different. You can see him and his sister, sunshine, bright sunshine, and he is relaxed and happy. You see, and we were lucky that the color of his glasses, because every person has a different color. You can see my color, it's different from his color. And for him, it is brown. So they look like sunglasses. That's why I see people do not stare much, but they do stare. You know why? Because he needs his glasses when it is nighttime and when it rains. At the left, you can see in London, right? Dark, right? And he is wearing his glasses and you can see he is relaxed and happy. By the way, he needs his glasses when it is dark more, even more than when it is bright sunshine, because of the contrast, you know, darkness and bright lights, like cars passing or this Big Ben you can see. And the same about rain. It is, of course, London. It rains all the time. So you can see he needs his glasses. As soon as he started wearing glasses, his language improved. And he reads, he can read now, and his behavior improved. And you know why I know it is his glasses that work? First, I never remind him to put them on. He doesn't wear glasses at home because everything is dim. We don't like, I can't tolerate bright light, and he can't tolerate bright light. So our lights, if you can see, it's very dim. It's very dark, but see, and sort of at home, he doesn't need them, but he won't leave the house, whether it is morning, day, or night, without his glasses. I don't have to remind him. He knows. And another proof that it's his glasses. When he was this age, you can see when we are in London, right? He broke his glasses several times because in some situations, the glasses didn't work. Too many people, you know, it was too much. And he was angry with his glasses. He was hitting his glasses. They're not working. They're not working. So that's why I knew it was his glasses that were. So just things to think about. Disturbance may be caused by certain stimuli, too many stimuli, just to remind you, and any sudden unpredictable stimuli, right? So we all know about it. Now, do you use ABC, antecedent, behavior, consequence? ABC approach. It means what causes the trigger, antecedent, right? Behavior itself, behavior, and consequence. Do you use it or not? Do you analyze the child's behavior, looking for trigger and what to do about it? Anyway, many do, and it doesn't work all the time. I will explain. Because challenging behaviors may be caused by present but invisible antecedent. What it means is the sounds we cannot hear, something we cannot see, but the child can. You know, the smell, we cannot smell it, the child can. So for us, it doesn't exist. For the child, it can be a trigger. For example, smells. Some children like smell like dogs. And if you think you take a shower every morning and you don't smell, think again, because you do. And some children run away from smells. So that's what I mean by present but invisible antecedent or trigger of behavior. Or they can be past antecedent. They can be past antecedent. Past. You remember we were talking about memory. If it is very unpleasant memory and it is triggered, the child can react. How would you know? I will give you just one example. We live in Yorkshire. So when my children were younger, we went for a day out to York. It's 2 hours by train. And I can tell you, York is one of the most beautiful cities in England. It's the most beautiful. And so we went there for a day. And the first time we went back to the station already to go home. And there are streets in York, because it's a very, very ancient city, so narrow, you can touch the houses, the walls, you know, it's very narrow. And we were walking along this narrow street to the train station, and there was a gift shop in the corner, and with 2 or 3 steps down. And I wanted to buy a souvenir, you know, it was our first visit. And we started sort of going downstairs, and he tripped and he hit the door with the shell door. Of course, I knew something would happen. I grabbed him, we ran away. 12 years after that, we went to York on another business. You know, my daughter was in the university, looking at the university. So again, we went to York. I forgot everything. But when we were walking back to the train station along the street, suddenly my son, who was a tall man already, you know, 20 something, he ran away from me. It's never happened before. So you can imagine, I was running to catch him. And I thought, what would I say to the police if anything happens, you know, all this. And then I saw this shop and I remembered what happened. So I ran even faster to stop him from whatever he wanted to do there. And you know what happened? He ran up to the shop and he kicked the door. He punished the door. Last time it hit him. So the revenge was sweet. If somebody else was with him and not me, what was the trigger? Out of the blue. There is nothing out of the blue in autism. Nothing. And that's why, see, that's what I mean. Past trigger, past antecedent. Then probable future antecedents. Something hasn't happened yet. The trigger hasn't happened yet. And we have challenging behaviors. It's, remember babies? They are asleep. But as they are unpredictable, the child can sort of initiate their crying. Or children breaking telephones because telephones are unpredictable to protect themselves, right? So there are many examples. Then last straw antecedents. If the child is tired already, overloaded and whatever, anything can trigger his behavior. We talked about it, emotional state of carers or teachers. Do you remember? Ecoemotica? Sometimes it is our emotional state that triggers. I can tell you, I traveled a lot before lockdown, you know, across Europe and Asia, conferences. And when I came home, every time it happened, you know, my son knew whether I was tired and happy or whether I was tired and angry because the plane was late, you know, trains were done, whatever. By the sound, I opened the front door. I opened the front door, he knew. And you know, there were there are 2 scenarios, and it always works. If I was angry, happy, tired and angry, you know, he was upstairs. He took my slippers and he threw the slippers in my direction and ran back to the bedroom. If I was tired and happy, oh, he brought my slippers, kissed me, and I kissed him. And what have you brought for me? By the sound, I haven't said a word yet. The sound, I opened the door. So you see this, they are so sensitive to our emotions, emotional state. Please be careful. And it may be some synesthetic experiences. I'm not sure whether we've got time for synesthesia or not. No, I think not. But anyway, as each individual is unique in their sensory profile, it is very difficult to adapt the environment for each individual sensitivities. You remember, place hypo and hypo in one classroom, you will never find a teacher. So often it is not the stimulus itself that can trigger what we call difficult behaviors, but rather the inability to control or predict it. And the understanding of each individual's sensitivities is vital, or any intervention becomes a nightmare for both the person and those who work with him. And I think it is the last bit, more or less. Adaptations and compensations. Without our help, because of all these differences, different experiences, some painful, very early in life, these children develop perceptual styles to protect themselves. And two perceptual styles, monoprocessing and peripheral perception. Monoprocessing, using one sense at a time. Most people use all the senses simultaneously. For example, I'm talking now, I'm waving my hands, and I know I'm waving my hands, I cannot control it, sorry. And I can see, I can hear the sounds and whatever. For many of them, for many autistic people, it's impossible. They can use one sense and do it, whatever. Like, look at this picture. This was a nonverbal boy, aged 4, with autism, and he didn't blink when the picture was taken. His vision was very unreliable, distorted, and that's why he used his tactile system to learn. You see, he didn't close his, he closed his eyes because he couldn't use several senses simultaneously. By the way, we taught him to read, giving him plastic letters, plastic and wooden letters and numbers. He was very good at mathematics, by the way. So, and this is the example. I have noticed that when I am using a particular channel to address a task, if I attempt to introduce another channel, then I lose my place in the completion of the task and need to begin again. And what do we do? Look at what you are doing, right? Let us make their life more difficult. You know, sort of, please remember monoprocessing, many of them monoprocess. Now, direct perception hurts. We do know that many of them avoid eye contact, right? But this direct perception, it's not only about eyes, it is about any sensory channel which is directly affected, right? They cannot tolerate eye contact. For some, eye to eye, it is uncomfortable. For others, it is painful. Just a few examples from Lucy Blackman. I felt instantly unwell and sometimes terrified if I were face to face with a person. To look at any face from a social distance was intolerable. Or Luke Jackson. When I look someone straight in the eye, I feel as if their eyes are burning me. And Noni, someone looking directly into my eyes felt like an attack. So just think about it. It's really very important, because I witnessed when one Asperger's syndrome person was introduced to somebody, his question was, do you want eye contact or conversation? Because he couldn't give you both. He could either look at you and lose the ability to talk, or he can look somewhere else, you know, and that is why. How do we teach them? Look at me. No, don't. Please don't look at me. It's better to sit next to the child and to talk to something what is in front of you, not directly to the child. And by the way, when my children were younger, my daughter, who is 3 years younger than my son, they played together. You know how they talked? Do you remember this gnome? My daughter talked to gnome and my son answered and talked to gnome. So they didn't look at each other. It helped. They found this strategy themselves. I didn't help them. They found the way to play together. So this is very important. Of course, we will have to teach them to look in the direction of the person, but still never force eye contact. This is another example from Jasmine O'Neill. Autistic people often glance out of the sides of their eyes at objects or other people. They have very acute peripheral vision and a memory for details that others miss. Very important. Remember, for many, peripheral vision is very acute, and sometimes you think the child cannot see what you are doing here. They can. I know, because my peripheral vision is very acute. I can see what is going on here. And anyway, but gazing directly at people or animals is many times too overwhelming for the autistic one. It can feel creepy to be searched by the with the eyes. And look at this animal. This is my cat, our cat. We have several. Dasha, her name. And you know, when he was a teenager, he was watching The Simpsons while I was cooking his supper, right? I was cooking in the kitchen and he was watching this Simpsons cartoon. And every night it happens. It was sort of ritual. We know that cats don't like eye contact, right? Cats don't. Dasha, perhaps she was bored to death. What she did, when he was watching TV, she used to come and sat in front of him, looking directly at him. And he shouted, tell her turn away, tell her turn away. Of course, I ran to this TV room. Can you imagine how difficult it is to negotiate with the cat? I think it was entertaining for her. It's just unbelievable. But that's how I noticed that even animals, they cannot, my son couldn't tolerate. So peripheral perception, as I said, it is very well developed. Peripherally, they can see a lot more and hear a lot more. You look at these two boys. They are both nonverbal. You saw one who was the previous picture, and the other one, his friend, he had autism and epilepsy. And look, they are relaxed and happy, dancing with their mothers, because they are dancing with their backs to their mothers. That is why that's how they danced. They couldn't look and dance simultaneously. And another thing to remember their peripheral hearing as well is so well developed. My son will tell me a lot today what he thinks about me, because he can hear what I'm saying in the bedroom, from his bedroom, I think. You see, that is why never ever discuss a child in the presence of the child in the same room. Never ever. Because, you know, like Naoki Higashida, a Japanese autistic person, we are listening to everyone around us and we hear you, you know. When people are in the company of people with severe autism, they say whatever comes into their heads unfiltered. It's as if we don't even exist. The explanation, no doubt, is that we don't react visibly to what is being said. They can hear everything. What is more, even if some don't understand it now, they remember delayed processing, and their memory is perfect. They will remember it later. So this is very, very important. Don't discuss them, or discuss autism. So peripheral perception, you've got a list here. Never force eye contact, and do not approach the person directly in his hypersensitive modalities. When hypersensitivity of affected sensory channel is addressed and lessened, the direct perception becomes easier. And one sense is never enough. What we can do to help. You see, a typical picture. A young girl, nonverbal, about 5 years old, smelling people when they approach. And what do we say? Don't smell people, it is not nice. Of course it isn't nice. But if it is the only reliable channel, if your vision is affected, hearing, you know what I mean? And she uses the sense of smell to recognize people, to recognize things, to recognize situation. We try to shut this poor girl down completely. What is important, let them use this sensory modality that they can trust. plus start treating their problems, whether it is visual or auditory, because with appropriate treatment and environmental adjustments to decrease hypersensitivities, they gradually learn to use their sense organs properly, eyes to see, ears to listen, and so on and so forth. Like my son, before he started wearing his tinted glasses, he smelled everything. He didn't smell perfume much, but he wouldn't touch his food. He had to smell it. He didn't trust his eyes. Now, no problem. And what is more, do you remember I told you that Donna Williams said, forget about his hearing, it is vision. And his hearing was painful. Now I know why. Because if the vision is unreliable, hearing starts doing two jobs, to hear and to see. Because by the sound, with what I put, say, a glass downstairs in the kitchen, he knew what I was doing. You know what I mean? He was using hearing to see what I was doing. And as soon as his vision improves, that is it. Hearing is very, very acute, but it is not painful anymore. So it is sort of normalized. You see, it's so important to find out which sense is the main problem, because they are interconnected. Is one sense affected, others would be affected as well, like cascading, you know, like this. If you address the right problem, everything will sort of be better, much better. STEAMs, these stereotyped movements, and of course they have their function. I want you just to think why they do what they do. Naoki Higashida, a nonverbal autistic person. We've gotten to such a state that if we don't do these actions, we'll go to pieces completely. Or Carly Fleischman, a Canadian young woman. At night when I yell and jump around, it's not fun for me. My legs and arms tingle and I can't make them stop. I have to move or it gets worse. I'm hitting to stop this feeling. And functions, and no time actually, but there are functions. Defensive, to reduce pain or discomfort caused by hypersensitivity, and self-stimulatory, to improve the input in case of hyposensitivity. This is important. Look, two functions, the same behavior. For example, the child may be very hypersensitive visually, and he can do this to distract himself, you know, his vision, to distract from all the stimuli because of his hypersensitivity. Or his vision is hyposensitive. The child can do this, you see, to stimulate the vision. You remember, whatever autism is, it is never boring, right? So that's why, see, it's not just enough to tick the box. He does this and that. No, you have to find out the function. Compensatory, out of frustration, just pleasurable experiences. Again, it's important. They can do it to withdraw from this confusing environment, right? Shall we sort of, is it good or bad? It is both. It is good. It gives them some retreat. It gives them some sort of relaxation. But they cannot do it. We cannot allow them do it all the time. The longer they stay there, the less they would like to join us. You know what I mean? It should be like for us. Work first, then yes, play. Like my son, when he comes, used to come before lockdown from school or day center, for example, right? He went to his bedroom and for half an hour, I said, yeah, of course, hello, how's been your day and whatever, and that was it. I knew what he was doing there. He was lying on the bed and doing this. And it is okay. And then he came out refreshed and ready to face the world, you know. But if we let him stay longer, he wouldn't want to join at all, you know. So it should be like for us. First we work, then we relax, we play, we sort of watch TV and so on. Yeah, no two autistic people have the same patterns of sensory perceptual experiences. And that is why normal reality to an autistic person is confusing, interacting mass of events, people, places, sounds, and sights. There seem to be no boundaries, order, or meaning to anything. A large part of my life he spent just trying to work out the pattern behind everything. Set routines, times, particular routes, and rituals all help to get order into an unbearably chaotic life. This is Jolliffe, a lady with Asperger's. She graduated from the university. Think about it, how difficult it might be, and nearly there. Autism spectrum, sensory spectrum, or autism sensory subtypes. Like Jasmine O'Neill, autism never manifests itself in the same way twice, as there are many types of it. And please remember that autistic individuals differ from one another as their non-autistic peers do. All autistic people have their individual personality. And Temple Grandin, she writes about continuum of sensory processing problems for most people, which goes from fractured, disjointed images at one end to a slight abnormality at the other. It's sort of autism sensory spectrum. But now a lot of research has been done, and now it is possible to distinguish subgroups, sensory subgroups. You remember I told you that it's better to place children with similar sensory profiles, and it is possible now. Numerous individual differences indicating possible subtypes based on different patterns of sensory perceptual problems have been reported. I included very few references, but there are many more. Now we can sort of subcategorize into subgroups, classify into subgroups, and it helps. And please do remember different sensory experiences create different perceptual, cognitive, linguistic, cultural worlds. And I want to remind you about two parallel worlds. And the question, whose reality is more real? Try to imagine how they perceive everything and think about it. So differences in perception lead to development of different abilities, thinking styles, and communication. And being autistic does not mean being unable to learn, but it does mean there are differences in how learning happens. It is from Jim Sinclair. Please remember, help them, not create obstacles like, look at me, and other things, right? And these are sort of summary. Please remember, their reactions and actions are logical and rational, because they are dictated by their realities, which are very different from a normal reality. All these behaviors are logical and rational. And this is very important. It is highlighted. Work with autism, not against it. If the person monoprocesses, right? Don't say, look at what you're doing. You see, use this autistic features and you will get much, much better results. And the last one also, before you start teaching autistic children, learn about the way they perceive the world and themselves, okay? And learning how, remember we started with this, with Jasmine O'Neill, learning how each autistic person's senses function is one crucial key to understanding that person. I do hope you agree with me, with Jasmine O'Neill, and many other autistic people who say the same. And learning about parallel worlds will help us understand and help each other. And this book, it was my dissertation many years ago. I mean, without methodology, it was translated into Spanish, as far as I know, but it was in 2000 or something. It is very old. So it was revised recently, and it's not translated into Spanish as far as I know. It's translated into French. And so this is revised and with a lot of new information. The same idea. So, you know, my theories do not change. And please remember and teach yourself to jump from different perspectives. Do you remember young and old lady? So which way the stairs headed, up or down? Try to watch like this. This goes up. Can you see? Up, up, up. And if you switch the perspective, oh, look, I have to switch it. Now this goes down, this down, down, down. You see, it's impossible to see both perspectives simultaneously, but working with autistic individuals, learn to switch to their perspective. Okay, so this is my main advice, and more books just to show you my field, communication and language. It is very connected. A theory of mind and triad of perspectives, autism and the ages of the known world, and now the recent autism and spirituality. That is it. Thank you for your attention. Adios.